We're going to do chapter 2 today, that is the nationalist movement in Indochina. What exactly is Indochina? In today's world, we call it Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. But in those days, it was called Indo-China. That is the part which was colonized by the French. Now, the national movement, you'll see a lot of similarities and of course differences in the national movement in India as well as in these regions. Now, as I told you, it was colonized by the French. The French came to this region in 1858. Now, why did they find this region very good? You know that in the east they found there were fertile lands or there was cheap labor, and which is why by around the 1880s, when we say 80s, it means 81, 82, right up to 89. Around the 1880s, it was fully colonized. So that means they came in 1858 and then they colonized nearly the whole of the northern region. The northern region of this area was colonized. After that, they had the Franco-Chinese War. Okay, so they had the Franco-Chinese War. That means earlier the Chinese used to have a lot of control over this area, and the French had a war against the Chinese. The French won, and then they took over control of two regions. One is known over, they got control over Tonkin, and the other area that they had control over was Annam. So after the Franco-China War, they had control over these two regions. Indochina was thus formed in 1887. 1887, French Indo-China was formed. So do you understand what is Indochina? Indochina means today what we know as Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. This area was taken over by the French in the 1800s and it was colonized. If you remember Indian history, India was colonized by the British, while this region was colonized by the French. Okay, so we are going to do this story today. In your book, you can see the map where exactly you can see is Laos, that is in the north. Then you have Vietnam to the eastern part and Cambodia to the western part. Okay, we are talking about this particular region. Now, the French, when they took over this region, why did they take it over? One, it had natural resources. Natural resources can mean fertile land or it can mean other things which are available in that place. Also, they felt that if we colonize this area, we can civilize the backward people who live over here. The natives who live over here. Natives, that means the original people of this land. Even the British used to think that the Indians were backward and we should educate them, we should civilize them. Similarly here, the French felt that in these regions they could civilize these backward people. Now, what did the French start doing so that they could make good use of the natural resource which was there? The French began first irrigation projects. Irrigation projects, that means building canals, etc., so that water can be supplied, cultivation can be increased and rice can be exported. Now, 2/3 of the rice was exported. And Vietnam became first in the world in the exporting of rice. Who benefited from that? Did Vietnam or Cambodia, did these areas benefit from it? No. The French benefited from it, and that is why the French were building canals. This was especially in Mekong region, or what we call Mekong Delta. Delta, you know, is a very fertile area. It has a lot of fertile land. It has a lot of soil because the rivers bring down the fertile soil, alluvial soil. So that's why they had a lot of irrigation projects in the Mekong Delta. Rice production was increased. 2/3 of the rice, that means only 1/3 was kept for the consumption of the local people, and 2/3 was exported, making it #1 in the world of rice exports, of course for the benefit of the French. Second thing that they started was the railway network. Now the railway network was started so that they could link the northern part and the southern part. This is network to link north and south. Okay, so the northern part of Indochina and the southern part. Plus they also wanted to link with, so link the north and the south, link with China, that is the Yunnan region. And you'll find that they also managed to make a second railway line to link Vietnam and Siam. So link with Siam. In the olden days, it was known as Siam. Today, it is known as Thailand. So the first railway network was to link the northern and southern part of Indochina, and the second railway was built to link Indochina with Siam or with Thailand. Also, the Cambodian capital, it was via that. So, and the Cambodian capital okay, the Cambodian capital is known as Phnom Penh, P-H-O N-O-M and P-E-N-H. Okay, it's a little difficult to understand or remember, but you'll have to learn it. Okay, Phnom Penh. Now, by 1920s, their profits has increased. The infrastructure they were building, infrastructure, that means the basic things which are required so that they can make things further for their own benefit, of course. They were not building railways or they were not building canals so that it benefits the local people. It was for the benefits totally of the French. Now, why will you say should the French have colonies in these areas? They developed it economically. They earned profits. The profits increased. Their standard of living became higher. Demand for goods became more, and therefore the markets expanded. Now, what was the problem or the barrier to economic growth? Barrier, that means obstacles. Obstacles, that means hurdles that they had to cross. And then only they can make profits. In rice, you can already see that they were #1 in exporting rice. But what other problems did they face? The population was very high. Now, if the population is high, most of the consumption of all the rice will be by the population itself. That means they will eat up everything and hardly anything will be exported. Of course, the French exported a lot, not caring about the local labor who were not very well paid. They were getting cheap labor, they were being exploited, and they were getting work done from them. The second reason, or why the economic growth could not go that fast, was also because agricultural productivity was very low. Now, what is the meaning of agricultural productivity? Per acre of land, how much is produced? Of course, they were using traditional methods, and in those days they did not know about HYV seeds or high yield variety seeds, pesticides, fertilizers. So they were doing it in the traditional method. So productivity was low. Most of the production was eaten up by the population, and mainly the peasants were indebted to the landlords. Indebtedness, that means कर्जे में डूबे हुए. They had so many loans to pay. Sometimes they did not have good crops, so they used to take loan from the money lender, and then they used to always be in debt. Okay. Japan, on the other hand, realized. Now, Japan is also an eastern country, just like Indo-China. Japan realized very early that if we are just depending on agriculture, we will not be able to make a profit, or we will not be able to have growth in our economy. So Japan got industrialized very, very early, but the French were not interested in industrializing this region. Basically, it remained an agricultural region. Two places over here that they had taken was the north and the south, but in the north the French had a stronger hold. Over here you can see. But of course with railway, now nearly all of the northern and southern parts came under their control. They had cultivation of not only rice we already saw, but they also had rubber cultivation. Now this region comes very close to the equatorial region. That means it is hot, it is humid, and it is very conducive or suitable for the growth of rubber, which is why rubber was also grown. It did not benefit the peasants, the people who were actually working, the labor. Why? Because most of the land was either owned by the French or by the elite Vietnamese. Now, what is the meaning of elite Vietnamese? Elite means the upper class, cream of the society. That means the rich Vietnamese, who are very few, they owned the land, or you had French people who owned the land or the cultivations which were there in this region, and they had the local laborers who did not really benefit from it. This also led to landlordism. Landlordism, similar to how in India we had zamindari system, where the peasant was exploited. Similarly, in the rural areas or in the villages over there, you had landlordism. Okay, so we got the background of this region. Now let us continue. Now we can see that the French had got a strong foothold in this area, what we call Indo-China. Now there was a dilemma. Dilemma means being in two minds, dvidha manasthiti. Should we have French education or should we have the local Vietnamese education? Now the French wanted to introduce French language into this region. Like the British educated the Indians in English so that they could get an entire class of babus or clerical work. For that they needed people who knew English, that is in India. Same way here, they wanted to teach the French language to the local people. Now in a way they felt that if we introduce French, what are the advantages? Okay, now introducing French or modern or Western education. Now what will be the first advantage? The first advantage will be, they felt, for civilizing the native people. That means they felt that the local people are not at all civilized, they are very uncivilized, and they will become very civilized. Okay. The other reason was introduction of modern ideas. So they are very traditional, so modern ideas can be implemented or introduced. But what were the problems? That means introducing French language or French education. What could be the problem? First, it destroys the local or native culture. People become very westernized, they forget their own language, or they start learning a foreign language, that is French, and they forget their own traditions or their own culture. So that was the first problem. Second problem was that the colonial domination of the French might be questioned. Okay? the natives might question the colonial domination of the French. That means actually in India also, when English was introduced, the Indians started learning a lot about the Western culture or about their history. They learned about the American War of Independence, they learned about French Revolution, and the Indians started feeling, why can't we also revolt, get rid of this colonial rule? Actually, one of the British persons said introducing English into India was a mistake. It was like giving them the milk of the tigress. Those who were very calm, cow-like, they suddenly became fierce. So here they felt that by introducing Western ideas, modernization, introducing them to the world may make them question that why should you rule over us? Of course, their justification for ruling was what? That we are trying to civilize you, we are doing it for your betterment. See, we have built railway for you, we are starting education for you, we have built canals. Actually, it was all for the benefit of the French. Okay? Now, this was of course the locals. This was their fear that their culture will go. Here, the French were a little worried that the locals might start asking questions, and some of the French citizens who were living in Vietnam, known as the colons. That means those who had come here to colonize and then they were living here. They were originally French citizens. Who are the colons? The French citizens living in Vietnam. Okay, now what was the fear of the colons? The colons feared that they may lose their jobs. That means there were teachers, there were shopkeepers, other jobs where they needed to know French. Those slowly the Vietnamese started learning French and they will get the jobs, and these people will lose their jobs, even that of a policeman or in school. Now, influence of Chinese culture before the French could introduce their culture or their language was very, very strong. That means education of the elite is the upper class, or I told you cream of society, used to be in Chinese. Now this Chinese influence has to be removed. Okay, the domination of Chinese influence has to be removed, and they have to start introducing a new type of education. Now, as I told you, it was a dilemma. Should we start French? They said yes, we should start French because then we can civilize them. Let them see how superior the French are, and they will understand the sentiments of the French and the feelings of the French and how wonderful the French are and how good it is that the French have started colonizing them. That means the locals should start feeling like that. But it was decided that Vietnamese should be taught in the lower classes. Okay, so it was decided that Vietnamese should be taught in the lower classes and French should be taught in the higher classes. Actually, when you are studying something, you understand everything best in your own language, right? That means you can understand it easily. Even your parents can teach you if you have any difficulties. And then in the higher classes, they can introduce French. That is what they thought. Now, introducing French and trying to attract people to learn French, they told them that if you learn French, you will be given French citizenship. That means you will be considered not as a native but as a French citizen. So that was the advantage. But who could afford to join the French classes? Only the elite. Those who were rich, they could learn French because they were separate paid for classes. Now the main thing that they taught, one was science. They introduced science in school. They introduced hygiene. Hygiene means how to remain clean and your daily habits and all that. And French. French was a separate part. That was in the evening. and for that they had to pay separately. Otherwise, they started what is known as a free school. Now, the Tonkin's Free School this was started in 1907, okay? 1907. Now, this school used to teach all subjects free, but if you wanted to learn French. Now, what was the attraction of learning French? They will get French citizenship. What was the problem of learning French? They will have to pay separately for that. They also told them in their textbooks, whenever they read French textbooks and all, they used to glorify the French, they used to tell them how wonderful their culture was, and tried to make the natives believe that since the French have come, they are living in peace. The farmer is also not very worried now. He can be calm and concentrate on his work. There are no pirates anymore. Pirates used to be sea robbers. So since the French have come, they said everything is going very well. The problem started in 1926. In 1926, there was a school in Saigon, okay? The Saigon Native Girls' School. A protest started over here because one of the local girls, when she was sitting on the front bench, she was told, you please go behind and sit. Let the French girl sit in front. So that was very upsetting. Most of the girls got up and went. That girl protested and they said, okay, you'll be suspended from school. All the girls got up and went. So they said, all of you will be suspended. And then the principal also of the school, she refused to accept those girls back. Countrywide, everywhere this protest spread all over. And people all over started to consolidate their power. Here you found that a lot of them wanted to do something about it because they felt that the French were treating the natives as if they are nobody. Y'all are uncivilized, y'all are unimportant, and the French were given more importance. So they did not like this. Also, there was a change which could be seen in the way that people were dressing. They were cutting their hair. You can see in your textbook, they have given you one song. Okay, hair cutting song, it was called. Comb in the left hand, scissors in the right, snip, 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 clip, clip, clip. Watch out, be careful, drop stupid practices, dump childish things, speak openly and frankly, and study Western customs. So, you can see people soon started developing what is known as the Western culture, wearing Western clothes, adopting Western hairstyles, and cutting their hair according to the Western culture. So, you find that people were becoming modern, but who were these people who were becoming modern and learning French? Only the elite. The common man still did not relate to the French. He still realized, I am being exploited, I am growing rice, but that is being exported. 2/3 of it is being exported. I am not getting enough to eat even today. And the French are benefiting from it. They are profiting from it. Once this, in 1926, we saw the protest started in Saigon, and you started realizing that it started going everywhere. Students all over the country started protesting. Journals were published like the Enemy Student, or even a political party was started known as the Party of the Young Anon. This was in 1920s. Schools became an important place of political protest now. Political and cultural battles. The battle was between the French culture and the Vietnamese culture. Education for the Vietnamese should be in Vietnamese or in French. They tried to change their values, norms and perception and tried to make them feel that you are inferior and we French are superior. But finally, you find that slowly and steadily the French culture or the Western culture came into this country. Like we can see, because of the British, how Westernization came into India. Now, let us look at the rebuilding of Hanoi. Hanoi was a city which the French decided to rebuild. They decided to have French type of architecture. So they had modern architecture, modern engineering, and you find very well laid out beautiful avenues. Well laid out, beautiful avenues. What are avenues? They are very wide roads, okay, like the main roads. You had very large sewers. Now sewers, or what we know as the gutter or the drainage system. So on both sides of the road you had very large sewers. So this is all that they introduced in Hanoi. Okay, they rebuilt it, they made it very modern city. Now the old quarter, that means the other area, was kept as it is, there was no modernity. While here they wanted to showcase the beautiful French architecture. Now the problem with building these large sewers was, it was also a wonderful breeding ground for the rats. Rats, as you know, they spread a very dreaded disease known as the plague. In olden days, entire villages used to get wiped out, entire cities used to get wiped out because of the black plague, or what was known as the bubonic plague. Rats themselves do not spread plague. Most people think it is the rats, but on the rat they have a flea. Okay, in Hindi they call it pissu, which normally is on the rat, and wherever the rats go, naturally they will spread, and the plague will also spread. So this disease spread in 1903. There was a widespread disease all over the city because there were lots and lots of rats who were growing and increasing in these sewers. So that same city which they were very proud of, that we have built a beautiful city, unfortunately that became the breeding ground for rats, and because of the rats you had the bubonic plague in 1903. During this time they started what is known as the rat hunt. Now when the rat hunt was announced, the people started hunting for rats. They told them that you will be paid every time you give a rat to them. Now how do you prove that you have given a rat? You have to give part of the tail. So what they did was, they wanted to make more and more money. That look, I caught a rat, now give me the money. So the French authorities were giving them money for catching rats. So they used to cut off the tail, give it as proof, and allow the rat to go free. Then again they used to catch the rat. So nearly 20,000 rats were caught during this rat hunt. And in fact, they were very happy if there are more rats. The local people, they were earning money, or they thought this is a good way of making money. It's known as a bounty. That means when there is a price kept on someone's head, that if you catch them and bring dead or alive, we will give you money. So these locals started enjoying this rat hunt, not realizing that actually because of the bubonic plague, there is a lot of lives that also went in the disease. If you see a parallel in India, also the plague when it struck, Officer Rand was very cruel about how he went about it, and Lokmanya Tilak had even written against it. In a similar manner here, how the French authorities went about trying to handle that plague was very atrocious, very cruel, terrible way that they did it. But you found over here that the local people, their way of revolting against the French was a little funny over here. That means through the rat hunt, they tried to make a lot of money. Now, what is the next thing that was affected? We can see that they have introduced their economy in such a way that it will benefit them by making the locals grow rice and having rubber plantations. Second area that we saw was education also. They tried to introduce French education. The culture also was brought in. In architecture, you can see how Hanoi was restructured with French architecture. The other area where we see changes that took place, and that is religion. Originally, the Vietnamese were basically Buddhist and they followed Confucianism. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher, and most of the elite people were very well versed with Confucianism. In fact, in China, most of the civil servants used to get jobs only on the basis of their knowledge of Confucianism. Christianity was introduced by the French missionaries who came there to spread their religion. Lots of people were converted. Nearly 3 lakh people converted to Christianity. Okay, so that means originally they were Buddhist or Confucian and they converted to Christianity because the Christian religion was introduced by the French missionaries. There was a movement which was started that was known, one was the Scholars' Revolt. Okay, so you had the Scholars' Revolt that was in 1868. Okay, against the spread of Christianity. Now this happened mainly in 2 regions. One region, that is the N is silent, so we'll say Guan region, and the second region where it started was in the Hatian. Okay, so these 2 provinces, there was a revolt of the scholars against all the Catholicism or the Christianity that was being spread, and about 1,000 Catholics were killed. Why? Because they felt that our religion, Buddhism and Confucianism, is slowly being crushed and everyone is converting to Christianity. There was another movement also. There were some people who said that they had visions of God, or they saw God in their dreams, or God came in front of them, and people used to follow them. So there were other religions also, local religions, which continued. There were some religions where it was like a mixture of belief in different things. But one particular movement which became very famous was the Hua Hao movement. Okay, so you had the Hua Hao movement. This Hua Hao movement started in 1939. Now let us do a little bit about this movement. This movement was started by a person who used to perform miracles. So naturally people were very impressed, and he used to help the poor, of course. Now his name was H-U-Y, be very careful of the spelling, N-H, okay, pronounced as Hyun Fu So. You're learning a lot of Vietnamese names, right? So Hyun Fu So was the founder of the movement known as Hao Hao movement. Okay, now he performed miracles, all the people started following him, and what they liked was what he taught them. He said that all these useless expenditures in religion, it is of no use. So naturally the poor people will like that. He also was against selling child brides. He was against alcoholism, that means not to drink alcohol, not to have opium. Opium is a drug, or in Hindi it is known as afim. Okay, so he was against all that, against gambling. So people liked him and people started following him and they started going along with him. The French, of course, called him a mad bonze. Okay, they called him mad bonze. And they put him in a mental asylum. Mental asylum means a mental hospital. The doctor who was treating him, he realized that no, he's not mad. What he's saying is right. And in fact, the doctor also started following him. And 1941, they declared him sane. Sane means opposite of insane. Insane means mad. So from the mental hospital, the doctor declared that no, he's not at all mad. And he had lots and lots of followers. But of course, the Christian missionaries continued to do their work and they started spreading their religion. So you can see how slowly the French are bringing in their influence where education is concerned, culture is concerned, architecture and also religion. We know that the French tried to modernize Vietnam. Now what exactly was modernization? Was it westernization? That means going towards the west. So some people felt that what is good from the west we should take and what is not good we should not take. But we have to continue to oppose the domination of the French. That means only what we feel is good in the modern world or the Western world, we should learn from that. But it should not happen that the Vietnamese traditions are slowly weakening. Now, during this period, there was a very educated person. He was educated in the Confucian religion. Actually, Confucianism is not a religion. It's a way of life. Okay? How to live your life in a good way. That is what Confucius used to teach. But slowly people give it the name of religion. Hinduism is also considered as a way of life. Anyways, so this person was educated in the Confucian way of life and he was a nationalist. So he started a new revolutionary society. Revolution or Kranti, that means to bring about a change. And his name was Phan Bao Chao. Okay? Phan Bao and Chao. He started a revolutionary society in 1903. So his revolutionary society was started in 1903 and the name of the society was Dui Tan Hoi. Okay, he started a revolutionary society known as Dui Tan Hoi. Will you remember the names? And started by Phan Boi Chao. Okay. Now, what did he exactly advocate? Phan Boi Chao met the Chinese reformer Liang Qiao. Q is pronounced as Ch in Chinese. Okay. So, please note that though the spelling is Qichao, it is pronounced as Qiao. In Yokohama in 1905. His most influential book, The History of the Loss of Vietnam, was written under the strong influence and advice of Qiao. That means the Chinese philosopher or writer. So he wrote a book where he felt that slowly the Vietnamese culture and the traditions are being weakened. It became widely a bestseller in Vietnam and China and was even made into a play. The book focuses on two connected themes. One is loss of sovereignty. Now what is the meaning of sovereignty or sarvabhumitva? That means self-rule. Slowly the Vietnamese are no longer ruling themselves. The French are ruling us. And the second is the severing of ties with China. Earlier, Vietnam had very strong ties with China. If you remember, they were influenced by the Chinese culture, even the Chinese language, the Chinese religion, that is Confucianism. So slowly, severing of ties means cutting off of ties. They were separating slowly from their own culture as well as the influence of China. The ties that bound the elites of the two countries within a shared culture. So, Vietnam and China were bound together by what? A common culture. And that slowly was going away. Is this double loss that he laments about. Laments about means he complains and he says that we are losing our own identity. We are also losing the connectivity that we had or the connection that we had with China. Other nationalists strongly differed from him. One was Phan Chu Trinh. Okay, this is another nationalist. You have Phan Chu and Trinh. Okay. So this is another nationalist. Now he felt slightly differently. He was against monarchy. Against monarchy, that means against the rule of the king. And he also wanted a movement against the French, but through the court. Now, let us see what he wanted. He was intensely hostile to the monarchy and opposed the idea of resisting the French with the help of the court. His desire was to establish a democratic republic, and profoundly influenced by the democratic ideals of the West, he did not want a wholesale rejection of Western civilization. So he said outright not to oppose everything that is Western. Now this person, Phan Boi Chau, did not want so much influence of the French or the westernized culture. While on the other hand, you had Phan Chu Trinh, who felt that what is good in the Western culture should be taken. But what he was against was monarchy. And he didn't want to reject Western culture totally. He accepted the French revolutionary ideal of liberty. But he also felt that French people, you are the ones who gave us the principles of equality, liberty, fraternity and all. But what about our own liberty? You are dominating over us, you are colonizing us, you are exploiting us. What about our liberty? So he felt that as an ideal or as an adarsh, it was very good. But we also need our liberty. He demanded that the French set up legal and educational institutions and develop agriculture and industries. So what were his main points? He was against democracy. He wanted a democratic society. Then he wanted legal and educational institutions to be set up by the French. That means because the French were ruling then. He also wanted development of agriculture and industries. So you can see that here he was for liberty, that means democratic society, and there should also be liberty. Okay, so these were all his principles. Now the controversy as to what exactly is modernism, that means should we go the Western way? So when they realized that Japan was also very modern, they also realized that Japan had managed to win a war against a huge giant like Russia in 1905. So they decided, let's go east. Okay, so for modernization, they decided to go east. That means to Japan. Now this was in 1907 or 08. Nearly 300 Vietnamese students went to Japan. Went to Japan. Now what did they go to Japan for? What were their objectives? The first thing was they wanted to acquire modern education. The second reason why they thought that they will become educated and all, they also wanted to drive out the French from Vietnam. That means they were nationalist, and all this, whatever they were doing, is so that they can improve their own country. They will learn from Japan and then they will come back. The third thing that they wanted to do was to overthrow the puppet emperor. this emperor had been placed over there by the French. Puppet means Katputli. Okay, so the French used to make him dance according to their tunes. Whatever they wanted, the emperor used to do. And they wanted to re-establish the old dynasty which had been deported by the French. That is the Nguyen dynasty. And to bring back means to restore the Nguyen dynasty, which had been removed by the French. They were also influenced not just by Japan, but there was also a revolution that took place in China. In 1911, the Chinese Revolution led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen. Dr. Sun Yat-sen believed in nationalism. Now, to give you a little background, in China also there were the imperial colonists, and that is the British. British had introduced opium in China. That was their way of getting into China to trade with China. On the other hand, they had what was known as the Manchu dynasty. The Manchu dynasty was ruling over China. They had come from Manchuria. Manchuria is to the northern part of China. Of course, this is not part of your lesson. This is just to give you a little background about the movement that was taking place in China. So in 1911, Dr. Sun Yat-sen decided, after he was educated in the West, to come back to his country and to free his country from these two problems. One is the Manchu dynasty, the rule of the Manchu dynasty, and the second was the British imperial hold. The British were again exploiting China, and this movement in China gave inspiration to the people in Vietnam that we can also do something about it. So in Vietnam, they started an association for the restoration of Vietnam. This association was known as Vietnam. That means the Vietnamese name. Chuan, I already told you, Q is pronounced as Ch. Phuc and Hoi. Okay, so this was their name. The Association for the Restoration of Vietnam was called the Vietnam Chuan Phuc Hoi. Now, what was their objective? Their objectives, that means what did they want to achieve? First thing, they did not want constitutional monarchy. So they did not want constitutional monarchy. They wanted to get rid of monarchy. That means they did not want any king, whether he's a puppet king or whatever. They wanted what is known as democratic republic. Okay, this is what they wanted. Democracy means it's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Republic means the head of the state who rules you is chosen by election, that means by the people. That is what they wanted. And it was also an anti-imperialist movement. Here the imperialists were the French, so they were against the French. Have you understood? So that's why they started this association, so that they can get rid of monarchy, they can get rid of the imperialists and then establish a democratic republic. After this, you find that in the 1930s, you know that the First World War took place between 1914 and 1918. After the World War, there was a great depression everywhere in the world. There was unemployment and everyone was affected, far and wide. Now you'll say, why was Vietnam affected? Because you know France was also part of World War I. If France was affected, naturally Vietnam was also affected. Now the 1930 depression, when I say 1930s, okay, so it was in that period that you had the Great Depression. The Great Depression first affected the European nations. America was affected much later, and of course all the colonies of the European nations were also affected. Now because of this, what all happened? How was Vietnam affected? The prices of rice and rubber crashed. That means it came down. The second problem was rural unemployment increased. And therefore, in these rural areas, that means in the villages, you also had a lot of rural uprisings. You know that the main export was rice, and other than that they also had rubber plantations, but now they were not getting that much of a price for it. And because of that, unemployment increased, and naturally all the peasants, the workers, they started their uprising. Now from the 1800s, when the French first came to colonize, our story has reached 1930. That is when the depression hit the whole world nearly. In February 1930, Ho Chi Minh brought together competing nationalist groups. Why? Because there were many nationalist groups all fighting for different things. Basically, everyone wants two things in common. One is to get rid of the imperialists, that is the French, and to stop monarchy, and to start what is known as a democratic republic. So he brought them together under one common Vietnamese Communist Party known as the Vietnam Cong San Dan Party, renamed the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. Okay, so in 1930, you had Ho Chi Minh. 1930, the leader was Ho Chi Minh, and he started the Indo-Chinese Communist Party. This Communist Party brought together different nationalist parties under one umbrella. He was inspired by the militant demonstrations of the European Communist parties. Now, which European? Actually, it's not European, Eurasia or Asia. You know that Russia was the first country to start communism. In 1917, after the Russian Revolution, we had Lenin, who started what was known as socialism. Later on, during Stalin's time, of course, it became a different version of communism. In communism, basically everything belongs to everybody. That means to the community. Unlike democracy, there is no capitalism. They believe that the capitalism creates two classes, that is of the haves and the have-nots. That is, the workers, the peasants, they will remain poor. And in communism, they wanted an ideal society where there was more division of all the resources so that it benefits everyone. There is not two distinct classes, but what we created a classless society. Okay, so he was very influenced by that. In 1940, Japan occupied Vietnam. Now please note, first they went to Japan assuming that Japan will help us to become modernized, to become educated, and we will become modern in the Japanese way. That means the way Japan has industrialized itself, educated itself, not in the French way. And Japan occupied Vietnam as part of its imperial drive. You know that Japan was also part of World War. Japan, Italy, as well as Germany. These three were known as the Axis powers who fought against the other power, that is the Allied powers, that is England, France, and of course America joined in later. Russia had pulled out after World War I, and of course it came in a little late afterwards. The League for the Independence of Vietnam, which came to be known as the Viet Minh, fought the Japanese occupation and recaptured Hanoi. So now here, the Vietnamese had to fight on two fronts. They had to fight against the French to get rid of the French, and they had to fight against the Japanese because the Japanese had occupied Hanoi in 1940. The new Republic of Vietnam was created. So now you have a free Vietnam, and the new Vietnam Republic was created with Ho Chi Minh as the first chairman. Now what were the problems that this new republic faced? First, the French tried to regain control by using the emperor Bao Dai as their puppet. We saw earlier also that they were using him just as a puppet. The supreme French commander of the French armies had declared confidently that they would be victorious. But they were not victorious. The Viet Minh, that is those who are fighting for Vietnam to become a republic, they easily crushed the French. Second problem that they had to face was in the peace negotiation in Geneva. Geneva is in Switzerland. You know that United Nations is also in Geneva, the main, but that time UNO had not yet started. If you remember, after World War I, League of Nations had started, and over there in Geneva it was decided that Vietnam will be split into two parts. That means the North and the South. Okay, so Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party, they will be in the North, and in the South you had Bao Dai's regime. Who is Bao Dai? He is the monarchy, that means the king, but he is the puppet king. That means he is totally in control by the French. Third problem was this division set into motion a series of events that turned Vietnam into a battlefield, bringing about death and destruction. The Bao Dai regime was soon overthrown by a coup led by Ngo Dinh Diem. Diem built a repressive and authoritarian government. Anyone who opposed him was called a communist, and he was killed, and he was jailed or he was killed. Diem retained Ordinance 10, a French law that permitted Christianity, but he outlawed Buddhism. Now what does it mean? He said that Christianity will be allowed, but Buddhism will be against the law. His dictatorial rule came to be opposed by a broad opposition under the National Liberation Front. Now the National Liberation Front was in the south. Okay, so here you have this in the south, and the Communist Party is in the north. Of course, the National Liberation Front was a nationalist party. With the help of Ho Chi Minh government in the north, they fought for the unification of the country. Unification means the north and the south should come together. So naturally, the Indo-Chinese Communist Party supported the National Liberation Front. The US watched this alliance with fear. Now what does the USA have to do with it? Okay, USA is far away. Just now we are talking around 1940. 1941, if you know, Pearl Harbor was bombed by Japan. And 1945, that means nearly at the tail end of World War II, US entered the war. But US was watching what was happening here. You know that there was a Cold War going on between Soviet Union, former USSR, major part of it is of course Russia, which still remains today. USSR no longer exists. There was a Cold War going on between USA and Soviet Union. Soviet Union was the first country to become communist, And with that influence, this Indo-Chinese Communist Party was also influenced by that Communist Party or the principles of communism, which US was against. US was a capitalist country. The world had been divided into two blocks, the communist bloc and the capitalist bloc. The communist bloc, mainly Soviet Russia or Soviet Union, USSR, and the capitalist bloc, that is the Western countries, comprising mainly of countries like USA. So they were watching with fear, wondering what is going to happen, because they don't want the spread of communism. Now the entry of USA in the war. From 1965 to 1972, a lot of people were sent from US to the Vietnam. Not that the US citizens were happy, because the people felt that we are losing our son over a war which is fought in Vietnam, which is not even our war, that means fighting against the Northern Communist Party. US had sent a lot of medical supplies, casualties were high. Casualties means there were a lot of deaths. Lots of people died in that particular war. You can read the figures in your book, okay, very large numbers. Not only that, they also used a lot of chemical weapons. They used napalm. Now napalm has been explained in your book. It's an organic compound used to thicken gasoline for fire bombs. The mixture burns slowly, and when it comes in contact with surfaces like human body, it sticks and continues to burn. So the body will continue to burn because it will stick to the body. Developed in the US, it was used in the Second World War. Despite an international outcry, it was used in Vietnam. That means the whole world was saying it's so cruel to use this, and yet it was used in Vietnam. So that is napalm. The other, Agent Orange. Now Agent Orange has also been explained in your book, the deadly poison. Agent Orange is a defoliant, a plant killer, so called because it was stored in drums and marked with an orange band. So that's why it was called Agent Orange. Okay, they used to have an orange band on the drum. Between 1961 and 71, some 11 million gallons of this chemical was sprayed from cargo planes by US forces. That means from top, from the plane, it will be sprayed, so that it would be easier to kill if there was no jungle cover for people to hide in. That means all the plants will die. In case people are hiding in the jungle, in the forest, all the plants will die and the people will also be killed. Or they will be exposed and it will be easy to kill them. Over 14% of the country's farmland was affected by this poison. That means it will not only destroy the forests, it will also destroy the crops. It will damage not only the crops, but there will also be cancer and brain damage in children. And according to a study, is also the cause of high incidence of deformities found in the sprayed areas. Because from top, with the aeroplanes, they used to spray all the areas, and the people, the plantation, everything used to get affected. The tonnage of bombs, including chemical arms, used during the US intervention, mostly against civilian targets. Civilian means who are the common people. They are not even the soldiers. They are not even fighting. In Vietnam, exceeds that used throughout Second World War. The kind of destruction that these bombs that US introduced in Vietnam caused maximum destruction in Vietnam. The whole world did criticize them. The US citizens themselves were very upset that they are part of that war, because the kind of budget that was required to fight this war, a war that did not concern them. It was not their war to fight, but simply because of the Cold War, if there was another country that supported communism, US was sure to step in. You had phosphorus bombs, and this destroyed many villages and destroyed the jungles or the forests. Civilians also died in a large number. The effect of war was felt within US. Many were of course critical. Sometimes you find that US used to glorify that war. Movies were made. The very famous movie in Hollywood, that is John Wayne's Green Beret. Now beret is actually the cap worn by the French. Okay, it was green in color, the military berets that they used to wear. This movie became famous and it used to glorify war as if it's a wonderful thing. People feel, yes, we want to go to Vietnam to fight. We are talking about the youth of USA. This had been cited by many as an example of an unthinking propaganda film. What is propaganda? Prachar karna. That means they were trying to show that war is a good thing. They were glorifying war. It's great to die for your country. Other films were of course more critical. Apocalypse Now, if you have seen, they will show you the total destruction that was caused by the bombing by US in Vietnam. The war of course grew out of fear among the US policy planners. They were worried that Ho Chi Minh government, that means the communist government, will become very strong and communism will be established in other countries. In those days, there was literally what is known as an iron curtain. Countries that were communist, many people did not know anything about them. Nothing was known about them. The Western media used to make a lot of to-do about it, and they were always suspicious about each other. Spies being sent to another country to find out what is happening over there, what are they making, their arms, their ammunition, maybe nuclear. In those days, of course, there were no nuclear weapons. So whatever research was being done, okay, so there was a kind of atmosphere of suspicion and Cold War. What they call in Hindi as Shita Yudh. Okay, that means it was not an actual war, and yet there was a kind of a warlike situation. They underestimated the power of a small country to fight the most technological advanced country in the world. They did not think that Vietnam will be able to stand against them. So US did not realize how united and strong the Vietnamese could be. Now the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Let us see what the Ho Chi Minh Trail was. In your map, you can see the trail which joins, or it's a network of roads that connects the north and the south. In this, nearly 20,000 Vietnamese troops used to go from north to south on this trail. We had a lot of porters. The porters used to be women. They used to carry a lot of load on their head. They used to also carry lots of load on their bicycle, nearly 70 kilos on their bicycle, maybe 25 on their heads. Most of the trail was outside Vietnam. That means you can see part of it is in Laos and also Cambodia. The US used to continuously bomb from top, and the trail or the road which was created used to get destroyed. Very quickly they used to rebuild it so that people could still continue to move. This Ho Chi Minh Trail was what connected all of them, and all of them came together to fight against the US. They did not have modern arms, ammunition, weapons, bombs, aeroplanes like the US, and yet the US was unable to get their hold on Vietnam, the nation and its heroes. Now, the women were also known to take part in this particular national event. The Vietnamese traditionally enjoyed greater equality for women than as in China. In China, women did not have that equal kind of position, especially among the lower communities. Even in India, if you see, the fisherwomen or the ones who go to work, the ones who are lower down, very often both of them work, the man as well as the woman. That gives them economic independence, that gives them equality. So in Vietnam also you find that the lower classes, the women shared an equal status. They also took part in the nationalist movement. They had a new image of womanhood. Okay, the one who takes part in military, they used to show women with rifle on one side, and of course she's going to work also. So here you have in 1930s a very famous novel written by Nhat Lin, which caused a scandal because here they showed that the woman left her husband and she married someone who was part of the national politics. Why? Because that was a person of her choice. So they realized that there was a new type of woman who has arrived in Vietnamese society. Heroes of the past time. In 1913, the nationalist Phan Boi Chau wrote a play based on the lives of the Trung sisters who had fought against Chinese domination. Okay, so his play showed these sisters fighting to save Vietnam from China. The actual reasons of the revolt are a matter of debate. That means some say that we didn't really have a revolt against China. China, in fact, our culture is influenced by that. So there's a little bit of a debate. But these sisters have been glorified. They were depicted in paintings, plays, novels, representing the indomitable will. Indomitable means the undefeatable will of the Vietnamese people. We are told that they gathered a force of 30,000 and resisted the Chinese for 2 years. When ultimately defeated, they committed suicide. Whom are we talking about? The two sisters about which this novel was written. They managed to get 30,000 people together, but of course in the end they died. A lot of women who were defeated committed suicide. Instead of being caught by the enemy and being tortured by the enemy, they preferred to commit suicide. Then there's another story about Trieu Ao. You can see in your book they have shown a picture of Trieu Ao. They showed that in the story that she was orphaned when she was a child. She lived with her brother and then she left home, she went into the jungle and she organized an army against the Chinese. She became a sacred figure or a martyr. That means though she died, they feel wo shaheed ho gayi. That means for her country. Women as warriors also were shown. You can see again women carrying rifles. Okay, so lots of pictures used to come out in the 1960s of the Vietnamese women who had joined the army. Many women responded to this resistance movement, and along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, young volunteers worked relentlessly. They worked very hard to keep that trail open all the time, though it was being destroyed continuously by the US bombing. One military historian argues that there were 1.5 million women in the regular army. Can you imagine? 1.5 million women. During times of peace also, that means once peace prevailed, women also took part in working. They worked in the farms, they worked in the factories, they were part of the production unit, not just fighters. Finally, the war came to an end. The prolonged war. Who was criticized for the war? US, the US of A. This was known as the first televised war. Television or media was covering this war and showing pictures to the whole world about this war. Many became disillusioned with what US was doing. Even famous people like Jane Fonda, you must have heard of Jane Fonda, Henry Fonda, they're very famous actors. Even Jane Fonda visited North Vietnam and she praised them for being so heroic. The scholar Noam Chomsky called the war the greatest threat to peace, to national self-determination and to international cooperation. The widespread questioning of government policy strengthened moves to negotiate an end of war, and a peace treaty was signed in Paris in 1974. So, 1974, the end of war, the war between US and Vietnam. And peace treaty signed at Paris. So war came to an end finally, and that was the end of that mindless destruction. This ended the conflict with the US, but the fighting between Saigon regime and the NLF continued. The NLF occupied the presidential palace in Saigon in 1975 and unified Vietnam. So this north and south became unified, and in 1975 unification of Vietnam. Now Vietnam had got their independence much before India actually from the French. They had become independent in 1945 itself. Become a republic? No. The northern part was communist, as you know, and the southern part we had the National Liberation Front. So these two parts, that means here we are talking about 1945 and the war, that means Second World War was already over. League of Nations was first there, and then later on we had the United Nations. And United Nations also thought that this war was really mindless. But finally the war came to an end in 1974 and Vietnam was unified in 1975. Okay, so that brought North and South Vietnam together and the mindless destruction came to an end. So the French had gone, but their troubles did not get over, because then they had to face the US. And the whole world was surprised that such a small country with hardly any resources, where military resources are concerned, could manage to stand against the US of